Nikki Kay.
Mr Chair, I'm pleased to speak with regard to Part 3 of this Rugby World Cup 2011 Empowering Bill. But first, can I just say that it is a pretty momentous moment here, because I think there's some really great analogies happening between a piece of legislation that we are debating, which is designed to benefit New Zealand from an economic perspective in terms of world exposure, and at 7:20 p.m. this evening, the Prime Minister of New Zealand saved The Hobbit. And what we see in this country is a real contrast on this side of the House, and particularly with regard to Part 3 of this bill. A real contrast between a party that is putting legislation in place for economic benefit for New Zealand, for 4 billion people to watch our country, and we're seeing a Prime Minister that moves swiftly to save The Hobbit for New Zealand and save thousands of jobs for this country. And we're seeing a party on the opposite side of the House. We're seeing a party on the opposite side of the House that puts a whole lot of obstacles in place. A whole lot of obstacles in place for your average New Zealanders who just want a job at the moment, actually. And what I'm proud is we have a Prime Minister who has acted to save this film for this country, and I'm really proud of that. And I just want to relate that back to Part 3 of the bill, because Part 3 of the bill is about Rugby World Cup 2011. And Rugby World Cup 2011, we know 85,000 visitors to New Zealand. You know, the numbers in terms of watching The Hobbit are probably pretty similar. But can I just say that the whole debate this evening from the opposition has been about them opposing one specific clause within the bill. And what I say is there's been a lot of contradictions from the opposition team, particularly Ian Lees-Galloway's, who has said this evening that actually the whole clause means that the Labour Party actually oppose this bill. And then we've heard from all the other members that say, no, actually we support Rugby World Cup. Well, if those members actually supported Rugby World Cup, they would be standing here this evening and supporting this legislation. But actually, and let's just go back to the actual clause. This clause, all that this clause does is it says there is a process here in New Zealand. There is a process, a Rugby World Cup authority that will go through a process in terms of consents. It gives people their democratic rights. However, what we have said is this is so important to our country that actually we will go through that process, and we will have a specific, we'll consult with the opposition over who we appoint to that authority. We will go through that process. We will consult with different ministers of the Crown and get advice. We will ensure that authority is well resourced. However, what we've said is that just maybe, there could be a situation that could be unforeseen, and I know members have said, tell us what that foreseen situation is, but we have said very clearly this is an unforeseen situation, but it's very relevant. The reason Mr Mallard is interjecting right here, but it is very relevant to Part 3 because Part 3 deals with the applications of the authority. And what I'm talking about is actually a process which is relevant to the applications of the authorities. Yes, it is dealt with in Part 4, but what I'm saying is actually our government believes that this is too important to New Zealand. That's right. This event is the greatest event that we will ever hold in this country, and it's too important to New Zealand to allow a process. And I'm very pleased. I'm saying here today that we don't want to use this process. However, we're putting in a process in place that says if a situation occurs, our government would act. And there's a very clear decision for New Zealand, a contrast of two sides of the House, of a government ready to act in the best interests of our country, a real contrast on the two sides of the House. And this moment is actually very important for people to watch, because they will see a government prepared to act in the best interests of New Zealand, prepared to say, yes, there's a process, but however, if something goes terribly wrong and there's an unforeseen situation, then we will allow our elected members of Parliament, actually, to be accountable for that. We will allow that to happen. And I'm very proud to be supportive of government. I'm supportive of you, Prime Minister John Key. Good on you for saving The Hobbit. Supportive of the ministers that have been behind that decision. And I'm supportive of this Rugby World Cup empowering legislation, because it's good for New Zealand, it's going to create jobs, and that's what this side of the House is about.
Honourable Trevor Mallett.